everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for my quarterly genre wrap-up, and today we are talking about fantasy and fabulism. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the way that I currently do wrap-ups, basically I decided about 3 months ago now that I was going to do wrap-ups by genre. So every 3 months I do a wrap-up that is by a particular set of genres. Today I'm going to be talking to you about all the books that I read in July, August and September that fit into the categories of fantasy, fabulism, magical realism, mythology, retellings, and sci-fi. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Just to let you know that I have 10 books that I need to talk about, because you may or may not know that fantasy is probably my most read genre. So we have 10 books we need to talk about today. I will try and be reasonably quick. You guys all know me, I'm not super good at being quick, so we'll see how we go. But all of the timestamps for all of the different books are always in the description, so you can go and find the books that you're actually interested in if you don't want to sit through a whole video. I do have my CorePile spreadsheet down here on the computer. That is where I have been recording all of the information about the books that I have been reading and making notes. So if I'm looking down, that's why. Alright, so first book that I want to talk to you about is A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid Kemmerer. So this is the second book in the Cursebreaker trilogy. I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail about the plot of this particular book. It follows on from A Curse So Dark and Lonely. In A Curse So Dark and Lonely, we follow Harper and Wren. Harper is a girl from our world who has been taken over into this fantasy world, to the land of Emberfall, and she is supposed to be a paramour for the Prince Wren, and it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. In A Curse... In A Heart So Fierce and Broken, we follow Grey, who is one of the King's Guards to Wren, and we also follow Liamara, who is the princess of a neighbouring country that Emberfall is at war with, and we also follow Harper and Wren, although we mostly follow Liamara and Grey. I did enjoy the first book, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, but I far preferred A Heart So Fierce and Broken. I really appreciated the way that we got more information about the world at large. There was a lot more storytelling, a lot more world building in this one, which I really liked. I would have liked a little bit more information from Harper and Wren's point of view, although to be honest, I didn't love Wren as a character, so, you know, it would have been good for the point of view of more rounded story, but meh about his character. But I really liked Harper, and I would have appreciated more from Harper's point of view. However, I do really like Grey and Liamara as characters, and I thought they were done really well. The other thing I will say though is that I thought that it took a little bit too much time with the minutiae of a lot of the travel, which is fine, but it made the pacing a little bit off. We start out with quite a lot of information about what's going on in the world, about the political situation, and then we spend quite a bit of time with Liamara and Grey just traveling, and that was interesting from a character point of view, but not so interesting from a story point of view. In CorePile, I did actually give this a 4-star rating. So with CorePile, you basically do ratings out of 10. So you give a rating for character, action, and a whole bunch of different things, and then it's out of 10 overall. And then G from Books Roast, who's created CorePile, then has a list of how that relates to a 5-star rating system. So I gave it 4 stars. That's how it came out. I honestly, upon reflection, think I might drop that down to a 3.5. Although I did enjoy it and I definitely preferred it to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I still thought there were some areas that were a little bit weak and it could have done with a little bit more work, I think, really. So yeah, 3.5 star for A Heart So Fierce and Broken. The next book that I want to talk to you about today is another book that I read in August, and that is Sorcery by Terry Pratchett. This is a book that I buddy read with Ellie from Earl Grey Books. Ellie and I are buddy reading all of the Pratchetts. We're doing one a month at the moment, but there are a lot, as you can see behind me, so we may end up speeding it up to 2 a month. We'll just see how we go. Anyway, so this is one of the earlier Discworld novels. I love the Discworld. I really enjoy everything Terry Pratchett writes. I think that he's an incredible author. His main focus, even though this is definitely a fantasy book, his main focus is in his satirical comment on the world and on society and our belief structures and so on. So that is definitely the thing that he does best, and it just so happens to be set in a fantasy world. Having said that though, I do think that his world building is incredibly strong. You do really get a sense of the way these people live and the Discworld as a whole. For those that don't know, the Discworld is just that. It is a flat disc world that is floating through space on the back of Great Achuan, who is a great giant sky turtle. On the back of Great Achuan are 4 elephants, and then on the backs of the 4 elephants is the disc. The 4 elephants also have names. I do not remember what they are. So this one we follow Rincewind the wizard, who is a very inept wizard, and we follow I can't remember her name, but she is the daughter of Cohen the Barbarian, which is a take on Conan the Barbarian. And we also follow a sorcerer who is a wizard squared. So he's super powerful. He has so much more power than has been seen on the disc for a long time. And he comes along to the magical university and everything goes completely nuts. Everything goes topsy-turvy, and yeah, so it's great fun. It's a great comment on society, and it's always just really fun. He's very funny, so like I said, it's satirical and amusing. However, Sorcery isn't one of my favourite of the Discworld books. Pratchett, like most authors, definitely gets better as a writer as he writes. So later books are more in-depth, more involved, and just generally better told. But this is still great. It's just not a favourite. However, I always do love a Pratchett, so in Compile I gave this 7, which works out to be a 4-star rating overall. Okay, the next book that I want to talk to you about is The Empress of Salt and Fortune. This is another book that I read in August. This is a short novella by Ni Vo. I don't really know how to talk about this book. I enjoyed parts of it, but I was kind of confused for a lot of it, so it wasn't my favourite read over the last few months, but it was still interesting. I wrote here in my compile that I found it hard to get into, which is true. So it's written from the perspective of a monk who's travelling around to gather stories about the royal family in the kingdom where the monk lives. So it's a book there where there's multiple stories within the story, and the monk stops at a place that is important to the royal family where there's a lot of history and meets someone who tells them a lot of different stories about the royal family, and one empress in particular, which is known as the Empress of Salt and Fortune. So the stories were quite interesting, but the structure of the book is something that doesn't always work for me, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it really didn't work for me, but I definitely don't think that it was my favourite way of experiencing a story, and so therefore it didn't work super well for me. The other thing that probably knocked it down a little bit as well is that when I first started reading the book, I was actually listening to it on audio. This has got nothing really to do with the book, but it is definitely impacted my experience. So the main character is referred to as they. However, the main character's name is Chi, and the way that the person pronouncing the name made it sound like they were saying she, and so I was getting confused about who we were talking about because we were switching between Chi, or what it sounded like to me as she, and then they, and because there were other characters and as well, I wasn't sure if we were talking about if the they was referring to the main character or whether the term they was referring to the group of characters. But when I switched to just reading it physically, although obviously it was e-reader, but anyway, I did find that that was not a problem anymore, so I was able to understand it. So, I mean, like I said, that shouldn't impact, but unfortunately it does. to a certain extent. I mean, it definitely cleared up once I switched, but yeah, that's just an aside. If you are thinking of using the audiobook, maybe you wouldn't find it a problem like I did. Who knows? So I ended up giving it 5.86 in Core which works out as 3 stars. So like I said, it was definitely interesting and I enjoyed some aspects of the stories, but the overall way that it was structured was a bit hard for me to follow, and that definitely impacted my enjoyment. So there you go. So the next book that I would like to talk to you about is A Vow So Bold and Deadly by Bridget Kemmerer. This is the final book in the Cursebreaker trilogy. I didn't mention before, but I was reading both of these with Kat from Brews and Reviews. I also should mention that any booktuber that I talk about in this video will be listed in the description below, so you can go and check them out, which I think you should do. Anyway, unfortunately, I was really, really disappointed by this one. I thought it was the weakest of the books, and I thought that it was really lackluster. It wasn't well put together. It did the characters, I thought, a disservice, and yeah, I just generally didn't particularly enjoy it. So one of the things that I found was that there were a lot of potential storylines in the second book that could have been explored and been really interesting and wrapped up in a really interesting way in the third book, and they weren't. They just were either not wrapped up particularly well, or they were kind of just ignored or forgotten, which I thought was really disappointing. And instead of there being, like I said, all these disparate storylines coming together in a really complicated and, well, not complicated, but complex and interesting way, they ended up just being, oh, actually there's this big bad that we now have to defeat, and everyone has to come together to defeat the big bad. I apologise, I hope that wasn't too spoilery, but I just thought that was really lazy writing, if I'm honest, and I just really didn't appreciate that. Thought it was lazy and a really uninteresting way of ending the story. And then as far as characters go, we really didn't do very much with the characters that we had. The two characters, Liamara and Grey, that were given a lot of life in the second book were basically ignored. It was almost like Bridget Kemmerer was doing some kind of paint by numbers. Like, she was like, these are a whole bunch of tropes that people expect to see in young adult fantasy, so I better put them in there. Oh no, now I don't know how to finish it up. I'll just forget about all the tropes. So she didn't finish anything. As you can tell, I was really disappointed by the book, and especially since it was the final book in a series, it just wasn't good. So as you can tell, I did not rate this book very high. I gave it 4.57 on Core, which works out to 2 stars. Okay, so now we come to a fairly big tome. This is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I am reading this as part of the Wheel of Time read-along that is being hosted by Cece from Cece's Reading Journey, Anna from the Book Dreamers Alley, and Melissa from Rocket Reads. It was actually a reread for me. I think I read the first 10 books of the Wheel of Time like 20 years ago. I actually think I may have read the first sort of 5 books a couple of times because I wanted to reread because of where I got up to when they were still coming out. And then I read another 5. But then, I mean, you've all heard it being talked about. The middle of the books become a bit of a slog, and I just kind of didn't feel like I was done waiting for the books. I wasn't loving them as much as I had been to begin with, so I stopped reading them. Never read the Brandon Sanderson ending, so now I really want to read them, and I really want to get to the ending, especially given that I have now read some Brandon Sanderson and really enjoy his writing. Anyway, so I read The Eye of the World. I really, really enjoyed this book. It's been quite a while, like I said, since I read the series, so there were a lot of stuff that I'd forgotten, and it was really fun to dive back into the world again, and I remembered why I loved the first few books of the series anyway, as much as I did when I first read them. They're just beautifully written fantasy books. There's so much incredible world building in there. Jordan does such a good job of creating a really expansive fantasy world. You get a real sense of, like I said, it being an expansive world, of there being different countries, different nations, with different belief structures, different governments, and there are so many different people with different needs and different focuses, and it's just incredibly well done. I can definitely see that Robert Jordan really influenced a lot of different fantasy authors, particularly Brandon Sanderson. When I was reading The Way of Kings, I was very much reminded of Robert Jordan. When I was reading The Eye of the World, I immediately thought of Robin Hobb and George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Realm of the Elderling series and the Game of Thrones series, respectively. I thought that Jordan really influenced those authors, although when I looked it up, he published his first book in 1990, and Robin Hobb and George R.R. Martin published their first books in 95, so I guess they potentially were influenced by him, but they were more peers with him, which I didn't realise, so that was interesting to know. I guess potentially you could argue that that was kind of a trend in fantasy at the time, but either way you can definitely see the influence that Robert Jordan has had on subsequent fantasy authors. So yeah, really enjoyed this book. It is a tome, all of the books are tomes, so be aware of that going in, but I would highly recommend, particularly if you enjoy high epic fantasy. It is a big influence on the genre, so I definitely would highly recommend this series, and particularly the book I just talked about, The Eye of the World. So as I just said, Jordan wrote a really expansive world. There are a lot of really interesting characters, so I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail about the plot, even though this is the first book, but I will just say that basically we are following a group of young people from a small village in this world who suddenly find themselves in this much larger story, and it's about potentially the end of the world. So yeah, I gave this one an 8 on Cawpile, which does work out to be 4 stars. It's a very high 4 stars. I think realistically it's a 4.5. Even though I did say that I love this series, I do think that Jordan has a tendency to ramble a little bit, much like myself. So knocked off a 0.5 stars, but still an absolutely amazing book. Alright, next up is A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This is the second book in the Ember in the Ashes series. I don't want to go again into a huge amount of detail because it's the second book. In the first book we follow 2 perspectives. We follow Elias and Laia. Laia is from a group of people called the Scholars, and Elias is from a group of people called the Marshals. The Scholars have been subjugated by the Marshals, and in the first part of the book, An Ember in the Ashes, Laia's brother is kidnapped and her family are killed, and she escapes, and she then goes through a bunch of different things to try and figure out how to help her brother. Throughout this, she comes across Elias, who is one of the masks, which is kind of like the law enforcement but almost like secret police, so very well thought of within the Marshals. He's not sure he wants to be a mask. He has misgivings about what their purpose is. Anyway, they come across each other, and then this is a follow-on from that, basically. In this one, we actually follow a third point of view, which is Helene, who is now a very high-ranking mask, although she was at the academy with Elias, and Elias and Laia have kind of escaped and are continuing to try and help Laia's brother. And yeah, it follows that storyline. I did enjoy this book. I think the best thing about Sabaa Tahir's writing is her world building. I really appreciated finding out more about the world, getting a greater perspective on the world and what's going on and the different peoples that populate the world and the relationships between them. I thought that was really well done. Unfortunately though, I do think that her character writing, the way she writes characters even, is what kind of drags her, in my opinion. For me, it wasn't as well done as it could have been, particularly given that each chapter is from a different character's, well, the 3 perspectives, so we cycle between them, and it's first person narration within those chapters. So I really felt like, given that, she could have given a lot more in-depth look into the characters and what they were thinking and feeling, which she really didn't do, I didn't think, which is such a shame because, like I said, she really could have used that a lot more. It felt like more of a catalogue of events rather than getting the real in-depth look into what the characters were thinking and feeling. So that let down the book a little bit for me, which is, you know, a bit of a shame. Still definitely enjoy it. I still had a good time with it. I'm definitely keen to finish the series out. There's 2 more books in the series. But yeah, I didn't think it lived up to the hype, and I didn't think that it was as good as the first one, unfortunately. So on Callpile, this one got a 6.71, which is a 3-star rating. Alright, then we have The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This book has a very special place in my heart. My parents read this trilogy to myself and my sisters when we were younger. Well, they read it to myself and my 2-year younger sister when we were younger, and then when my other sister, who's 10 years younger than me, came along, I think I may have even read them to Carol. But either way, these were books that were very well loved in my childhood. My parents absolutely adore them. They are some of their favourite books, and so this has been read, reread and reread by me, to the point where I basically decided that I wasn't going to read The Fellowship of the Ring or any of the others ever again, because I knew it pretty much off by heart. That was about 15 years ago, so it's been a while, and I put myself forward as a potential person to be part of the read-along with Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany and be part of the live show, which I did do. It was a great time. I had a lot of fun. I will link that video in the description below if you'd like to go and see more of my thoughts and the other hosts' thoughts. It was great. A lot of fun. But yeah, so I reread it and I'm really glad I did. It definitely holds up for me as a really fantastic book. There is so much world building. That is what Tolkien is known for, his world building. He is the father of modern fantasy for a reason. The way that he fleshes out the world, the scope of the world, the different perspectives of the world, but not just that, the histories that he weaves, the languages that he created, all go together to create this real depth in the characters and the peoples that they come from, and in the different parts of the world, the different cultures that go into the world. It's just phenomenal. He really did an amazing job, and I just absolutely adored my reread. Definitely one of my favourite books of all time. But also his characterization, which is something that I feel like he's not lauded for as much as the world building, but his characterization was just brilliant. The history and the depth of information that you get about the different histories and cultures of the world really helps to build an understanding of the different characters and what their motivations are, why they react the way they react, the decisions they make, and it's just beautifully done. And yeah, absolutely loved this one. Gave this one 5 stars. Like I said, absolutely one of my all-time favourite books. I think it always will be, and yeah, really enjoyed my reread. Then we have Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett. This is obviously another Pratchett. This was my next reread with Ellie that I read in September. This is, again, still quite early on in the Discworld series, but I do think it is a bit better than Sorcery, partly because this contains some of my all-time favourite characters from the Discworld. So this is the first in his Witches series. With the Discworld series, there are kind of series within series, and you definitely don't have to read it in order. Ellie and I are reading it in chronological order, but anyway, this is the first in the Witches series, and Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Og are 2 of my all-time favourite characters, probably of all time, but certainly from the Discworld. This is sort of a retelling, sort of a mashup of a retelling or inspired by both Macbeth and Hamlet. We have some players in here who are travelling around and doing shows. We have the whole uncle murdered the king, child of whom is coming back to take over his kingdom. We have a bunch of different magical things going on, the witches trying to solve the situation, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun, and it's a humorous mashup of a retelling of those Shakespeares, and I highly enjoyed. This one also got 9 on Callpile, which is what Fellowship of the Ring got, so therefore also got a 5-star. The penultimate book that we are going to talk about today is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is a retelling of Ariadne, who is a figure in Greek mythology. Ariadne was the sister of the Minotaur being the son of the Queen of Crete, and so it is following Ariadne from basically when she was young and the Minotaur was born. So it catalogues what happened there, how that came about. It talks about her father and her father's tyrannical presence within the Mediterranean and Greece at the time, and we follow Ariadne as her brother grows up and becomes the monster that is the Minotaur that people know from legend, and then Theseus, who is the son of the king of Athens, who comes to Crete as part of a tribute to be basically fed to the Minotaur, but he overcomes Minotaur with Ariadne's help, promises to marry her, she runs away with him, and then he leaves her in Naxos, which is a Greek island. She is then noticed by the god Dionysus, and it's about her life from throughout all those experiences, and then being married to Dionysus, and then the children she has with him. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a fantastic retelling of the myth and myths surrounding Ariadne. Throughout most of the book, I was very much thinking about some of the Greek and Roman poets that I have read, that this obviously was inspired by, and Jennifer Saint obviously did her research, and yeah, it was just really fun. I thought the characterization of Ariadne was fantastic. We really got a sense of her and what she was about, what her life was like, what the effect of being the daughter of Minos and the princess of Crete, sister of a Minotaur, what effect that had on her, the effect of Theseus and Theseus's abandonment of her and what effect that had on her, and trauma, which I just thought was so well handled, so interesting. It's not a side of Greek mythology that you certainly didn't see back in the day very much, but it's definitely a really interesting look at Greek mythology in general. So I highly recommend, if you enjoy Greek mythology retellings or Greek mythology in general, or mythological retellings in general, I would highly recommend this book. I think it was fantastically well done. On Compile, I gave this one 8.86, which is 4 stars. I think I'm going to bump it up to 5 though, because upon reflection I really did enjoy this one. It was very easy to read and really approachable and just fantastic. So yeah, my battery is flashing, so I'm going to try and wrap this up quite quickly. We are onto our last book though, so hopefully I can do that. The final book that I'm going to talk to you about today is Legendborn by Tracy Dion. This is another book that I buddy read with Kat from Brews and Reviews. I did enjoy this one. I thought that it was really well done, but there were some elements that I didn't think were done as well as they could have been, if that makes sense. We follow Brianna, and she is sort of like a pre-college admission, like she's still in high school but she's doing college classes, so I'm not sure exactly what you call that, but essentially she is doing that at the University of North Carolina. We open the book with her witnessing some magic and some demonic activity, and then it goes from there, and it is actually a retelling of the Arthurian legend, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It's a very interesting take on the Arthurian legend. I mean, first of all, we're not in Wales. We are in North America, and it's taking a fantasy look at the story, the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and I thought that was really interesting. There were some other elements that were kind of weaved in more kind of African influences, and some of the influences around some of the I'm not sure how to phrase this, some of the kind of African religions that were brought in with slavery and have developed into their own beliefs and practices within their own right within America. So that was really interesting. So there was a different brand of magic that was kind of woven into the story, and the two types of magic are very much at loggerheads. I won't go into details about how that is resolved, but I thought it was resolved really well. My main beef with the story was the romantic relationship that was written into the story, and the real problem I had with that was that it was very insta-love, and it didn't feel like it particularly was important to the story. Both Kat and I were a bit like, why bother? And we weren't really buying it, and we weren't really appreciating it. But then at the end, that was resolved in a way that both of us thought was much more interesting than we had anticipated, and we really appreciated that. So overall, I definitely would recommend this book. I did really enjoy it. I'm excited to read the rest of the book. The way that it ended, the resolution at the end, and what it opens up for future books in the series was really interesting, so I definitely, want to continue. And I gave this one a 7.57 on Coldfire, which is 4 stars. So that is it for my fantasy, magical realism, science fiction, etc. genre wrap up for the months of July, August and September. Did you read any of these books at all in the past few months or in general? Please comment below your thoughts about these books if you've read any of them. Please do comment below if you are going to read any of these books. What were your favourites throughout the last few months? Did you read much or any fantasy, and if so, what did you think of them? If you would like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then please leave me some kind of fantastical emoji, so like a mermaid or something like that. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and find me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.